In this video, we're exploring 3 stories of people who spent New Year's Eve in the Appalachian Mountains and ended up experiencing something truly terrifying. If you celebrate Christmas, I hope it was an amazing one. And as we step into a new year, I just want to wish you all an incredible new year ahead. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. What I'm about to tell you happened on New Year's Eve of 2018, and I'm only telling it now because in 2025, I'm going back to the same place to spend New Year's again. My grandmother's house, which sits deep in the Appalachian Mountains in West Virginia. Every year, my family would rotate whose house we spent that night at. But we all had a special preference for my grandmother's place, mostly because of how many happy memories we had there. All of us lived in city apartments, so going to her house meant being surrounded by nature in a way none of us experienced in our daily lives. We usually stayed there for about a week, spending our days doing things in the yard and walking through the forest. And even though the cold was brutal, nobody ever complained. That year, in 2018, we were going there again. I was supposed to arrive about 4 days earlier, since the rest of my family was already there, including my parents who were coming from New York like me. But work had piled up in an absurd way, and I just couldn't get everything done in time. Because of that, they went ahead without me, and I promised I would drive up on New Year's Eve so we could spend the night and the first day of the year together, after which I'd have to head back. I really wanted to leave early enough to make the drive comfortably and during daylight, because the last thing I wanted was to be driving through the mountains at night on roads that were often difficult and had very poor visibility. But my neighbor knocked on my door to wish me a happy new year, and I couldn't get rid of him quickly. It has always been a problem of mine, being unable to clearly tell people that I'm in a rush and that they need to wrap things up. So I just stood there until he finished talking and left on his own. I don't want that to sound wrong, because I genuinely like my neighbor and I value having a good relationship with him. And wherever I live, I always make an effort to get to know my neighbors and build friendships. That day, though, all I wanted was for him to leave so I could get on the road. On top of that, my dog Penny had had diarrhea that morning, which made me hesitant about traveling with her. But I had given my word, and since she hadn't shown any more signs of discomfort other than being a bit slower and more lethargic than usual, I decided to go anyway. If I hurried, I thought I might still arrive before it got dark. But shortly after crossing into West Virginia, I had to slow down. It started snowing, and more than that, the wind picked up hard, which you really feel in the mountains, especially at higher elevations. Even so, I was making decent progress and figured that if I kept that pace, I'd only be driving a little after dark, and by then I'd be much closer to my grandmother's house in an area I knew better. Penny was calm beside me, though I could tell she still wasn't feeling 100%. When it finally got dark, I was only about an hour and 10 minutes away, so I felt confident. That road was usually almost abandoned, with barely any traffic. But that night I was pleasantly surprised, having passed around 10 cars already, which made me feel less uneasy about driving through there at night. About 50 minutes from my destination, Penny suddenly became restless and let out 2 barks that sounded mixed with whining. The last thing I wanted to do was stop the car, but she clearly needed to go, so I pulled over and put her leash on. Just before stepping out, I felt a chill run through me, strong enough that I opened the glove compartment and took out the knife I carried with me. Then I got out of the car. Penny was the kind of dog that needed to sniff around before doing anything. So even if she was desperate, I knew she'd want to walk a little first. I didn't plan on going far from the car, maybe just toward the edge of the trees. I wasn't panicking, but as I walked, a subtle discomfort started to creep in. All the stories my grandmother had told me when I was a kid, and the ones my older cousins used to share, flooding back into my mind. I kept telling myself they were just stories passed down through generations, though I also knew that stories usually start from something real, something someone saw and slightly altered over time. By then we had reached the trees, and Penny was still sniffing. The cold burned my lungs, and even in the absolute darkness, I could see my breath in the air. I made a mental note to buy a proper flashlight, because all I had was my phone, which worked fine at home but was useless out there in the middle of nowhere. My skin was crawling, so I told Penny we weren't going any farther, and that if she needed to go, it had to be there. I didn't think she'd understand, but she squatted and started to relieve herself, which brought me a brief sense of relief. That relief didn't last. She suddenly froze. Her entire body stiffened, the hair along her back standing straight up. And then she started growling at the trees in front of us. There are few things more terrifying than a dog growling or barking at a dark space when you know something is there, but you have no idea what. Before turning around and running back to the car, I looked toward where she was focused. And that's when I saw the most terrifying thing I could have imagined. In the darkness between the trees, I saw two red eyes. Instinctively, I pointed my phone light toward them, but it barely helped, only revealing a vague shape attached to those eyes. I think I let out a short scream and pulled the knife from my pocket purely on instinct. What I heard next chilled me more than the cold ever could, because I clearly heard a human, raspy voice coming from that direction, telling me that the knife I was holding wouldn't be of any use to me at all. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed Penny and ran toward the car, and thankfully I'd left the headlights on, making them the only source of light in that dark forest. I don't know if I was followed or not. All I know is that the next thing I clearly remember is already being inside the car, driving far faster than was safe or reasonable. During the rest of the drive to my grandmother's house, I kept thinking about one thing, that whatever those eyes belonged to, they were not human. I had seen red eyes before, especially in people under the influence of substances. But those weren't reddish. They were pure red, vibrant, as if that was their natural color, and they were larger than human eyes. Still, whatever it was, had spoken to me exactly like a person would. I know I didn't imagine it. I know I heard that voice. And even today, I feel like I'd recognize it instantly if I ever heard it again. When I arrived, I tried to act normal, but everyone could tell that both Penny and I were shaken. She barked at every small noise, her hair raised as if she were ready to attack, which anyone who knew her would recognize as completely out of character. As for me, I kept drifting out of conversations and repeatedly looking out the windows. When they asked what was wrong, I don't know why, but I lied and said someone had tried to break into my house, and that's why Penny was acting that way. Everyone accepted that explanation except my grandmother, who later caught me alone in the kitchen and told me she knew I had seen something in the forest. I asked her if she had ever seen a creature with red eyes, certain she would believe me, and she said no, but that she had seen other things, and that the best thing I could do was try to forget. I tried, and most of the time I manage. But whenever I see images of forests, or hear news about missing people, those eyes and that voice come flooding back. This year, Penny and I are taking that same route again, but we're leaving early in the morning, and no matter what happens, we are not stopping the car. I lived my entire life in the Appalachian Mountains, and my entire life I learned how to deal with things most people don't even imagine exist. I'm writing this now because what happened last New Year's Eve, in 2024, brought back something I hadn't thought about in decades. Something I first saw when I was a kid and tried to tell everyone about, only to be dismissed as having an overactive imagination. Back then, I eventually convinced myself that maybe they were right. That memory softens and reshapes things, especially when you grow up surrounded by forest, shadows, and stories that seem to bleed into real life. But last year erased that comfort completely. And now, in 2025, as I get ready to spend New Year's Eve alone in this same house, I can't shake the feeling that whatever it was didn't disappear. It just waited. I grew up in a house tucked into the mountains, far enough from town that the forest felt like part of the property, not something that began at a clear edge. Trees surrounded us on all sides, dense and old. And at night the darkness felt heavier there, thicker somehow. As a kid, I learned early to recognize the normal sounds. The wind through the branches, owls calling to each other, deer moving through brush, and even predators passing through once in a while. But there was one night when I was about 9 years old, when I saw something that didn't fit into any of those categories. It was exactly New Year's Eve, back when the night itself wasn't really celebrated, and all the importance was placed on January 1st instead. I remember waking up late, unable to sleep, and looking out my bedroom window toward the tree line, where the porch light barely reached. I saw a shape moving slowly at the edge of the forest, not walking the way animals do, not darting or cautious. It stayed just far enough back that the darkness hid most of it, but close enough that I could tell it wasn't small. I remember the way it seemed to lean forward, like it was studying the house and how it moved sideways instead of straight on. I watched it move around for a while, and I wasn't really scared at first. Not until the moment it started getting closer to the house. Back then, I was just a kid, and I didn't understand fear the way I do now. So instead of hiding, I simply opened the window and yelled something out loud. The creature lifted its head, looked straight into my eyes, and then disappeared back into the trees. I remember that the scene itself shook me so deeply that I spent the entire night trembling from the cold, as if no matter how many blankets I piled on, it didn't matter, because the cold wasn't around me. It was inside me. I told my parents the next morning, told my grandparents, told anyone who would listen, and everyone brushed it off as a dream, or a deer standing on uneven ground, or my imagination filling in gaps. Even my grandparents, who had spent my entire childhood telling me terrifying stories about the mountains, were the ones who told me to drop it, forget the whole thing, and stop talking about it altogether. After a while, I stopped talking about it, and eventually I stopped thinking about it at all. That is, until last year. New Year's Eve of 2024 was supposed to be simple and comforting, with the whole family packed into the house like we had done so many times before. The kitchen was full, the TV was on, people were laughing, and outside the cold had settled deep into the mountains. The kind of cold that makes the forest go quiet. Somewhere around mid-evening, I started feeling off. Not sharply sick, but heavy, achy, like something was coming on. My head felt warm, my stomach uneasy, and the noise around me started to feel like too much. So I decided to lie down for a bit, figuring I'd rest my eyes and rejoin everyone before midnight. I went into my bedroom, closed the door, and lay down fully dressed, listening to the muffled sounds of my family through the walls. For a while, I drifted in and out, that strange half-sleep where thoughts blur together. And then I felt that familiar sense of alertness that comes before you realize you're not alone, even when you technically are. I opened my eyes convinced that someone was there to wake me up and tell me it was time to go downstairs. But there was no one there. I lay still for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness of the room and trying to understand why I'd woken up so suddenly. And then, without really knowing how or why, I turned my head toward the window, as if some part of me already knew that something was there. At first I saw nothing unusual, just darkness, and the faint reflection of the room behind me. Then something moved. Something emerged from between the trees, exactly where I had seen it as a child. My body went cold in a way that had nothing to do with fever. The shape was larger than a person, and wrong in its proportions. Too long in some places, too narrow in others. And it didn't fully step into the open. It stayed near the edge of the forest, circling slightly, as if it understood the limits of the light and chose not to cross them. I stayed frozen, watching as it moved along the perimeter of the yard, not approaching directly, not retreating either, just drifting from one side to the other. What unsettled me most wasn't its size or its movement, but the sense that it knew exactly where everyone was inside the house, where the noise was coming from, where the warmth was. I felt an overwhelming urge to open the window and speak to that thing again. But before I could even move, it lifted its head toward my window, locked its gaze onto mine, and then simply slipped back into the trees the same way it had come out, swallowed by the darkness as if it had never been there at all. I don't remember how long I stayed there afterward, staring at the empty space, shaking from the cold or from something else entirely. But eventually the sounds of my family pulled me back, and I forced myself up, rejoined them, and said nothing. I didn't tell anyone what I had seen, because I already knew how that story ended. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I barely slept at all. Every small noise made me tense. Every shadow felt heavier than it should have. When morning came, I felt drained, like I had spent the night running instead of lying still. Now it's the end of 2025, and for the first time, I'm spending New Year's Eve alone in this house. The family is scattered this year. Plans changed, life got in the way, and I told myself I didn't mind. But as that night approaches, I keep finding myself drawn to the windows, checking the tree line, watching the edge where the light fades. I don't know what I saw when I was a child, and I don't know what I saw last year, but I know it was the same thing. And I can't stop thinking that whatever that thing was is going to come back for me, that it's been waiting all these years for the same night, just for a moment when it could find me alone. It's only a feeling, nothing I can prove, but it's a feeling strong enough to leave me absolutely terrified. I probably won't take long to tell this story. First, because I like to get straight to the point, and second, because the truth is, I don't really know how to write well. I don't know how to describe moments or feelings, but I'll do my best to tell you about my New Year's Eve in 2024. I've lived my whole life in the Smoky Mountains, and one thing you learn fast out here is to expect the unexpected. Things happen that people in the city wouldn't even think about, and you just get used to handling it and moving on with life the best you can. So as I was saying, last New Year's Eve, my family rented a cabin deep in the mountains, far from the main road. There are only 9 of us, so we always try to do something different. The place looked great during the day, but once it got dark, it felt different. The forest around the cabin is thick. The trees are tall, and the quiet isn't just silence. It's the kind that makes you notice every little sound. We were somewhat used to it because we live not too far away. The only difference is that we're not usually as isolated as we were there. Our tradition every year is basically to play games and drink until we can't anymore. And this year wasn't supposed to be any different. But around 8 p.m., when it was already completely dark outside, my sister's son said there was a man peeking through the bathroom window. He's only 7, which is already old enough to go to the bathroom alone and to tell a few small lies, but not the kind like this. I could see my sister go completely pale while asking him exactly what he had seen. My dad and my brother-in-law immediately grabbed their guns and went to check the perimeter of the cabin. My mom shouted for them to stay inside, but neither of them listened. They just loaded the guns and went straight out the door. Inside the cabin, we were all on edge, not only because the cold was coming in through the open door, but also because we genuinely felt like we were being watched. It was a horrible feeling. After about 2 minutes, they both came back in, saying that there really had been someone at the window. There were footprints. We all agreed to close the shutters and check every entry point in the cabin. We had no idea what the person wanted. Maybe it was just curiosity. But still, we didn't want to find out. We tried to go back to what we were doing, but obviously the mood had changed completely. There was no more joy. Just theories about who would be walking around in the middle of nowhere on a night like that. Only around 11, something did the atmosphere start to feel a bit festive again. There were no signs that the person was still nearby, and we were finally starting to relax. Then midnight hit, and we heard the first explosion. It was total chaos. We were holding our glasses, ready to make a toast, when outside, we heard the bang, followed by laughter. Several people dropped their glasses while trying to understand what was happening. My dad ran to the window where the sound seemed to come from, and as he opened the shutters, there was a second explosion. Only then did we realize someone was outside setting off fireworks. A man standing in the yard, laughing hysterically while setting off fireworks. I don't think any of us really reacted. We were just shocked and terrified. It was bizarre, and the way he laughed sounded like he was imitating a circus clown, an absolutely terrifying laugh. My dad grabbed his gun again, opened the window, pointed it at him and told him to leave or he would shoot. But the man didn't move. He didn't even look at us. He just kept lighting fireworks and laughing. My dad froze, then shut the window and the shutter again. My nephew was crying and everyone was trying to calm him down while trying to calm ourselves. Only after about 5 minutes did the explosion stop, but the laughter continued in different spots outside. He was clearly just some lunatic walking around and laughing. We spent the whole night in the living room, not really knowing what to do besides coming up with more theories about the man outside. Several times we thought he had finally left, only for the laughter to start again 30 minutes or an hour later. Sometimes closer, sometimes farther away. The next morning, he was still there, sitting outside in the snow. That night we had already decided we would leave as soon as morning came, but we honestly thought he would be gone by then. He wasn't. We just packed the essential stuff, went out together with the guns ready, and got out of there. As I drove away, I saw him still sitting in the snow, looking in our direction and waving goodbye. To this day, the owner of the cabin has no idea who he was and says he hasn't received any other complaints like that. We still don't know what he wanted, but it was incredibly creepy, and my nephew had nightmares for months afterward.